Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Last night's video address had to do with controlling who's in your circle and also controlling yourself. In this case, we're going to be picking up where we left off, not with John Morant or Jonathan Majors, but in this case, we're going to be talking about a scammer from Africa that you've probably already heard about. But it is an interesting case study in what happens when you decide you're going to do the wrong thing for the wrong reasons. On my Twitter page, I talked about the sentencing of a Nigerian email scammer named Ramon Abbas. He went by the Instagram screen name Hushpuppi, though he also liked to call himself the billionaire Gucci master. Ramon Abbas was part of a loosely knit group of scammers who used what was called BEC, that is, Business Email Compromise. They would send emails to corporations, particularly the middle managers and such, and try to see if they could get the person to give up information that would enable them to be able to hack the people's emails. Once they did that, they would wait to see if any invoices came through, and then they would try to trick whoever sent them the email into actually sending money to a different bank account, usually under the guise of, "Oh, we accidentally sent you the wrong account number and routing number. Here's the right one. Thank you very much." They did this to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, but as it turns out, they were also working in league with the North Koreans, believe it or not. Well, as it turns out, of course, the email scams are just one of many kinds of schemes that come out of Nigeria, and obviously this Abbas character is not alone. There's a bunch of Nigerians who run off to places like Turkey or Greece to run their scams. You can get a condo or an apartment cheap in those countries, and these Nigerian scammers run their operations from those places, whether it be the romance scams, BEC, or what have you. Now, Ramon Abbas, Hushpuppi, also thought he was some sort of influencer. He posted on Instagram all the time, posting all the stuff that he was getting away with. Of course, he didn't say where the money was coming from. He was giving all sorts of free advertisement to everybody from Versace to Gucci to Fendi to whomever. This guy thought he was slicker than most, and perhaps for a time he seemed to be. He ran off to Malaysia and then eventually ran off to Dubai. He had been doing his scam with an Arab accomplice, so that's probably why he chose Dubai, and Nigeria is a largely Muslim country, and he has a Muslim last name. Not sure how much that has to do with anything, but I have to think it has more than a little to. But this guy has spent a lot of his posts and his videos that he posted online invoking the name of Jesus. I guess he told himself that God doesn't mind him scamming. Well, God don't like ugly either. Now, as you might imagine, this guy grew up dirt poor in Nigeria, but when he finally was able to get himself a little bit of money, and then eventually a lot of money, and he went into his online persona, he chose a nickname and a demeanor and everything else that imitates Black Americans in the United States. So the only way that this man was even able to relate to any sort of prosperity was by pretending to be something he's not. All that goofy stuff that he would do, making it rain in the club and such, posing in front of high-dollar vehicles when the village that he came from didn't even have paved roads. Obviously, these guys, these so-called Yahoo boys, because that's what they would do, take out tons of Yahoo email accounts to run their scams, they just wanted to get the money so that they could prove that they could take it totally for granted. To them, getting the money wasn't a means to an end. It was an end unto itself. Well, in a world that runs on money, you have to be some kind of stupid to subscribe to a philosophy like that. And this explains why so many of these clowns wind up in prison, broke, or both. The messages that Abbas would post on his Instagram just came off as corny as you couldn't believe. This was obviously a man who was spouting words that came from the United States, a culture that he wasn't familiar with. He used the phrases wrong very frequently. He had no example of a baller in Nigeria that he could emulate. So he used our lingo, our language, and the type of ghetto fabulous swag that he saw from black people in the U.S., and it just came off wrong. This is not to say that Africans should be kissing our behinds or anything or bowing at our feet. We've never looked down on anyone or demanded that we be kowtowed to. Other groups trash us all the time to cover up their embarrassment about what's going on where they came from, but we've never rubbed anyone's faces in it. The only thing that we've said is be honest about the fact that if you leave home, travel thousands of miles to be on the other side of the world, and then you imitate the style and even try to lay claim to the history of people who you continually insult about how lazy and unintelligent they are, well, it lacks a certain style. You gotta earn the right to disrespect us, and the moment you leave home to be here, you've lost that right. While doing the background and research for this morning's briefing, I came across a video that Abbas had posted where he was practically on the verge of tears because I think it was his sister-in-law who died simply because they didn't have the antibiotics or what have you that they needed in the village clinic that she went to. He seemed to be very upset about this even years later. Why did she have to die? Why does the country have to be like that? Why does it have to be so screwed up? The problem is leadership. But leadership starts at the bottom, not at the top. Eisenhower said it best: if a political party does not have its foundation in the determination to advance a cause that is right and that is moral, then it is not a political party, it is merely a conspiracy to seize power. Africa is full and overflowing with conspiracies to seize power, and they've been successful. But why have they not been overthrown? That's the real question. You can claim that they have the support of the military, but the military comes from the people. So why does the society keep producing individuals who protect and enable the oppression of their own family members? To answer Hushpuppi's question, the reason that Nigeria is in the shape it's in is because they've practiced this kind of behavior for a very long time. The Nigerian government's endemic corruption is not simply the result of a few kleptocrats who are at the top of the government. And it's been going on long before the British showed up. As an example, black people in the United States made it safe and prosperous for Nigerians to come here. We made it possible for them to come here. But when they arrived, especially since the 1960s, they began to attack us. Now, why did that happen so immediately? Why did that come so naturally to so many of them? Well, Hushpuppi said it himself. Look at what happens in Nigeria and you see the answer why. It's a continuation of the same backstabbing and throat-cutting that we saw over here. Nigeria needs a revolution. Not just a political one, but a cultural revolution as well. In fact, all of those African nations need it. But without a loyalty system, a revolution will simply devolve into a free-for-all brawl for power afterwards, like what we've seen in Haiti. People who don't respect themselves are people who also don't respect others. People who are not humble enough to be grateful for the opportunities that other people made possible will be arrogant, prideful, and worst of all, they'll bow before whatever member of white power stands in front of them. Why do Nigeria's leaders oppress their own people? Well, here's a better question. What did Hushpuppi, do to stop them once he got some money? What has Akon done? Let's stop letting liars tell us fairy tales about these oppressive regimes in Africa. We're not dealing with some highly trained, highly motivated special forces here. They're gun-toting punks. I've seen videos of these cowardly security forces in Africa and in Haiti, and they run when they encounter any resistance. They don't believe in anything other than being part of the street gang masquerading as police or the military. They're bandits, nothing more. As they see it, they get to have a couple of minor perks, a couple of small benefits that go along with wearing a uniform for what that's worth. Usually the benefits take the form of killing somebody with impunity, or more likely they're going to rob somebody, or they're going to sexually take advantage of a woman, that kind of thing. They see that as being the benefit of wearing the uniform. So because they have gained so little, and because they didn't sign up based on honor or integrity, they're certainly not going to be eager to die for such a corrupt regime which they know to be dirty themselves. My point is that it would be fairly straightforward to begin a substantive dissident movement inside those countries. Those governments and their so-called security forces do not have the loyalty of the people. You have a few punks getting a couple of crumbs, and in most cases, all they get are bragging rights, not that they have much to brag about. You cannot say that you love a place that you flee from. Hushpuppi is in no moral position to ask why Nigeria is in the shape it's in when he did nothing to change it. Nigeria is dirt poor because the people who should be fixing it have fled, and then they forget all about it first chance they get. When you turn your back on your homeland, You can't act surprised that the situation there never improves. Look at Akon with Akon City. Actually, you can't really see anything, there's nothing going on there, but you can listen to his excuses. He'll break ground any second now, except the groundbreaking date keeps getting pushed back, and back, and back. This is the problem. Instead of going on Instagram, putting up posts talking about your ballin', what you need to be doing is taking some of those ill-gotten gains and start building. What I find to be the most laughable is that this Abbas character ran off to Dubai. Apparently, this genius thought that because Nigeria has a large Muslim population, and that because he had an Arabic last name, that the Arabs in Dubai would never turn him over to the U.S. After all, the UAE doesn't have an extradition treaty with the U.S. A shame the boy never learned to put in an honest day's work or how to read, because he'd have known that just because a country doesn't have an extradition treaty doesn't mean that they can't turn someone over to another country. It simply means they don't have to. In its most literal terms, it means that the country won't turn over one of their own citizens. But as for some resident alien who lives there, you don't get that level of protection. Abbas wasn't a citizen of Dubai. And even if he was, he's black, so as far as those Arabs are concerned, he wouldn't receive their protection anyway. He was just a high-priced squatter in their eyes. They didn't want him there. They were just tolerating him, and that was because he paid big to be there. You think those Arabs didn't know that he was a criminal? You think that every day that he wasn't there, they were not making jokes and going, yeah, this is one of those Nigerian scammers. Guess he must be a little bit smarter than the others. You think the United Arab Emirates, which basically is trying to bill itself as a playground for the wealthiest, you think the reputation of Nigerian emigres, as many of them being involved in some scam or another, hadn't made it to the UAE, as if they were just totally unaware of that? This is a place that tries to make itself as a playground for the wealthy. Of course they were already thinking, where's this guy's money come from? When the Dubai authorities had him arrested, they took not just his money, they took his cars, those physical possessions, and they took his freedom as well. He figured because he had a little bit of money that the Arabs would respect that, as if his money meant that they respected him. And they showed him that as far as they were concerned, his millions and millions of stolen dollars did not buy their respect. They didn't need to send in their SWAT team loaded for bear to get this guy, and they definitely didn't need to videotape it either, but they did both to make a point. They treated him like he had committed the biggest crime ever, and then they made sure the video went public. He was busted and humiliated. The point was made. The lack of an extradition treaty only protects Arabs, and black people aren't Arabs. Hushpuppi actually thought his last name would mean something to them. That would be like a black man with the last name Jones thinking that the British are his pals and will respect him because he has a European last name. Though I gotta admit, I did get a kick out of it when I read that he had changed his description of himself from billionaire Gucci master to real estate developer just before he got caught. He clearly doesn't know what a real estate developer actually does. None of them lives the way that he does, not because they don't have money, but because they work all the time. They can't just lounge around showing people how much food they can put on a table. And no, I cannot co-sign what this fool did, because he was making money by lying and stealing, and also because he didn't do it to help anyone but himself. All the whining that he did about Nigeria and how the system and the government there fails its citizens, and he wasn't stacking up that money to help Nigeria. The most he did was to go home and throw around some $100 bills so he could act like a big shot trying to show everybody that he's rich now. But that's nothing but a pointless vanity project. It's making it rain in the club, or in his case, the church, I suppose. He didn't give a rip about Nigeria, because when he was in a position to actually help Nigeria, he fled and didn't look back and didn't do anything. His plan, his entire goal, was to keep scamming and trying to be a big shot on Instagram, like a teenager who will never grow up. Well, those same people that he had been trying to impress online are laughing at him now, and he deserves it. Hushpuppi was always going to wind up in prison. It was guaranteed, because he had no exit strategy. He thought he would be online as a scam artist forever. When you make your money illicitly, you have to be realistic and make it a point to walk away before you wind up in prison or dead. You look at all the rappers who this clown tried to imitate, from Dr. Dre to Snoop Dogg to Ice-T, Jay-Z, 50 Cent to T.I., you name it. These men all allegedly dealt drugs, but when they went into the rap game, they left the drugs behind. That's why they're all rich and free, while Ramon Abbas, Hushpuppi, is going to be cooling his heels in a cell while Uncle Sam and the Dubai government rape his pockets. And when he gets out, expect him to have more legal troubles. He robbed a law firm and he was going after corporations, so I'll bet they're biding their time. Those companies, if not the governments of the countries they're based in, they're going to want that money or at least a piece of him. Everybody's going to be looking to get their pound of flesh. Another reason why he was destined for prison was that he made a target of himself, and that's the point of this morning's briefing. Black people in general and black men in specific are not supposed to be flashy, even if your money's legit. We are a hunted people all over the world, including the folks in Africa and the Caribbean who apparently want to convince themselves otherwise when it's convenient to them. We live in a world that hates us. You can run to Malaysia, Dubai, or anywhere else you want. It doesn't change that fact, and we have to be realistic about that. In Hushpuppi's case, he was a criminal and needed to be in a cage, though he could have spared himself that if he stopped trying to be such an attention whore. Too many black men suffer from that malady. For example, Frank Lucas, the man who Denzel Washington portrayed in the movie American Gangster. Lucas had become one of, if not the biggest drug dealer in the country, and nobody even knew he existed. Not the feds, not other drug dealers, nobody. He had succeeded in flying completely under the radar. Drugs were flooding into the U.S. at that time. The authorities didn't have a clue, though, who was bringing it in. But one NYPD flatfoot, who was looking for someone else entirely, happened to stumble onto Lucas when they both attended a Muhammad Ali fight, and Richie Rich noticed this black man who nobody knew walk in wearing a $100,000 chinchilla coat with matching hat. He stuck out like a sore thumb that was spewing blood. Frank Lucas, up until that point, had done a very good job of flying under the radar. He had done a very good job of remaining hidden. But all it took was one time that he decided that he would let his ego control him. And that was all it took to destroy him. To have done something that unnecessarily eye-catching means that Lucas would have wound up in prison or dead inevitably. The cops didn't even know he existed, and they wouldn't have if he hadn't shown them. You know, you got a number of black folks who are like that. That's why I pointed out the Ja Morant story from last evening's address. Too many black people suffer from terminal insecurity. They simply can't help themselves. They're immature, like a child who has a secret that they simply can't keep to themselves. But Hushpuppi and those like him simply fail to understand he's not a child. And what you have isn't merely some little secret. You have a chance to change your life and those of generations unborn. You have power in your hands when you've got money, and power must be jealously guarded. Those who fail to guard their power wind up losing everything. You know, it reminds me of the TV show Breaking Bad. Walter White was the mild-mannered but financially failing chemistry teacher who made his own homemade meth that was of almost 100% purity. Gus Fring is the brilliant but utterly ruthless drug kingpin who hides in plain sight by dealing his shipments out of the chicken restaurant that he owned. Walter White is book smart, but plumb dumb when it comes to flying under the radar. He was in his 50s, but failed to attain real financial success. Clearly this ate at him. Even when he was making money dealing meth, he still needed to show people that he was successful. He couldn't just have his millions of dollars of dirty money and be satisfied with it. His ego wouldn't let him. Now, there was no reason for him to be showing people what he was holding, but he was insecure. He just had to show all the people who looked down on him that he had made it, when the truth of the matter was he had more money than they ever would. In terms of economics, Walter White was a different species entirely now. But he didn't believe it, and as a result he put himself on law enforcement's radar, which eventually brought him to his end. Gus Fring had been a mentor to White, helping him to understand how to set up a proper drug distribution network and how to do things without getting caught. In one particular episode, Fring and Walter White are having dinner at Fring's home, and Gus tries to educate his would-be pupil on the right way to handle things when he said, "You are a rich man now, and one must learn to be rich. To be poor, anyone can manage." And you can tell this is true in spades for Hushpuppi. He stands there in designer shirts looking so awkward and so out of place. His poor posture is not the only culprit for this. He has a distant expression on his face. It's clear as day that wearing expensive clothing is an alien experience to him, no matter how many times he's done it. This is not normal for him, and it shows. Perhaps if he had earned his money honestly over the course of years and adapted to it as opposed to stealing it and getting these things in a matter of days. He looks like he's play acting at being successful largely because he is. There was no chance that this guy wasn't going to get caught because it never occurred to him to take his money that he was stealing and try to go legit with it, invest in legal things. But to do so, that would have required a level of work and attention and focus that he simply wasn't willing to give. Scamming is easy. Investing is hard. But to get back to the Breaking Bad comparison, Gus Fring had a number of constructive traits, like his total obsession with order and structure. But by far what made Gus Fring the most dangerous man alive was that he operated in the shadows, and he loved it that way. He hid in plain sight. If he wanted to touch you, you couldn't stop him because you couldn't see him, unless he wanted to be seen. And when it came to living his life, he came and went as he pleased because nobody knew who he was. He owned some chicken shacks. Nobody knew how much he had. Compare Fring to, say, Pablo Escobar, the biggest drug dealer in the history of the world. Escobar was worth hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion, so much he couldn't count it all, and neither could the DEA. Pablo, while he was being reviled as a narco-trafficker, tried to run for the presidency of Colombia. First of all, that was a long shot, even in a country as violent and notoriously corrupt as Colombia, but also it was unnecessary. Pablo's problem was that he was scared of being extradited to the United States or otherwise put on trial in Colombia. He was scared of the authorities in his home country and in the U.S. But even becoming president would not have insulated him from the possibility of going to prison. Now, what he should have done was focus on building his power as a professional influence peddler. But in order to make that work, he would have had to stop drug dealing. He simply didn't want to accept that nobody was going to want to really be politically in bed with a man who everyone knew was dealing drugs. See, Joseph Kennedy understood that he couldn't make a lifelong career out of being a bootlegger. Even if Prohibition hadn't ended, he didn't want to have to run loads across state lines the rest of his life. He wanted his family to go legit. J. Edgar Hoover hated him and hated his sons, and while Joseph himself was politically radioactive, his sons were not. Joseph Kennedy made his pile from being an illegal substance trafficker, and then he stopped and parlayed that into legitimate pursuits. The rest is history. Compare that, on the other hand, to, say, Al Capone. Now, here's a little factoid for you. According to Forbes, there's 2,755 billionaires in the world, with over a quarter of them being in the United States. I'd like you to think about that. There's 724 billionaires in the U.S. alone. Now, tell me, can you name even 10 of them without having to look them up? I'm not asking you to name 50 or even 20. Just name 10. You probably can't. And that's because while there's some people whose business ventures are so vast and ubiquitous to everyday life that you can't help but know them, the overwhelming majority of billionaires in America are people you've never even heard of. And they keep it that way. 99% of billionaires in the U.S. are people who, for all you know, you probably met. Or maybe you've seen them at the grocery store or at the mall or at the repair shop of your local dealership. Billionaires. Hiding in plain sight. Power. Hiding in plain sight. You don't know how they make their money. Jeffrey Epstein was no billionaire, but he was certainly wealthy, and to this day neither law enforcement nor the few investigative journalists from the white media who bother to look are sure how he made his money exactly. They can account for some of it, but a lot of that money he made, they're not really sure where it came from. And 99% of people had no clue who Jeffrey Epstein even was until his scandal broke. He flew presidents and princes and moguls on his jet, hosted the rich and powerful at his pedophile getaway, but nobody knew he existed until a few years ago. There's no advantage in everyone knowing who you are or what you have. There's nothing to be gained by putting your business out in the streets. At some point, a black man is supposed to grow up and stop looking for attention. This is the second video in a row to deal with this because some black folks only want to become successful so that they can flaunt it. Go see a therapist if that's what you're about. If Hushpuppi had gone legit, he would still be free. But he hadn't cultivated any other skill other than scamming. With the amount of money he had amassed, he could have become a successful investor, eventually, but he didn't bother to learn about that, and besides, investors have to pay taxes, and I'm sure he had gotten used to living a tax-free lifestyle. But even if he had stuck to scamming, if he had stopped going on Instagram showing everyone every little thing that he had bought, or been gifted by these white corporations whose brands he was helping to push, then he most likely would still be a free man, on the run to be sure, but free. The feds themselves admitted in court that it was his Instagram post that helped them to establish his identity as it related to the criminal case. See, when you're making money illicitly, you're gambling with your freedom and your life. And you can only roll the dice so many times before it inevitably comes up snake eyes. In Pablo Escobar's case, you wind up dead. In Hushpuppi's case, you wind up in a cage. But even if he had been a straight arrow making honest money off of, say, stocks and bonds, would that have made his flashy behavior any better? He would have been the subject of tons of IRS investigations, even though he would have been legit. This video essay is for all black people, but for black men in specific. You can chase money or chase attention. You can't chase both. Those who try to make money off of being famous for nothing, those who try to monetize fame, are rarely successful. And the few who are never have a moment's peace. Most falls from grace begin with someone who starts doing too much. And when you've been riding high, it's hard to believe that this too shall pass, but it always has, and it always will. The only question is, what will you have to show for it when that day comes? The answer will largely depend on how much time you spent trying to impress other people. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Codified Trucking, Miss Debbie, Ginger Vine, Imani Metadaji, and Mark Singleton. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.